This is Power BI and More with Business Solutions MVPs Scott Sewell and Joel Lindstrom. Today we're going to be talking about data modeling for Power BI. But first, let's talk about our sponsors. Do you use WordPress? If you do, you need to check out Alexa CRM. WordPress powers more than 25% of all the websites on the internet and is the number one choice for blogs, websites, and portals. Dynamics 365 is a de facto standard for sales, marketing, customer service, and industry solutions. Now they can work together thanks to Alexa CRM and the Dynamics CRM WordPress plugin. You can capture forms, engage your users and customers, all without writing any code. Control your site in WordPress while keeping your data in Dynamics 365. And Alexa CRM has provided an open source Dynamics 365 PHP toolkit that unlocks the world of Dynamics for PHP developers. And you can download your 30-day trial from alexacrm.com/plugin and instantly create a portal by connecting Dynamics 365 to your WordPress site. We're also sponsored by Kingsway Soft, and Kingsway Soft is our favorite data transformation and integration tool. Kingsway Soft's a leading provider of Microsoft Dynamics integration software, including Dynamics 365, CRM, AX, NAV, GP, SL, as well as many other applications. So whether you need one solution or you need several, Kingsway Soft works easily within the SSIS platform to make your integration process as quick and easy as possible. Thanks Alexa CRM and Kingsway Soft for your support of Power BI and more. So, Scott, what's this I hear about you going into modeling?
It's been a lifelong dream, and they said to follow my dreams.
You are in the fashion headquarters of the world in New York City, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. That's why I'm standing here in a pair of cargo shorts. Because that's the kind of fashion forward I am.
Today, Scott will be modeling a summer number.
That's right. I'm wearing I'm dressed in old man chic.
Now I think we're talking about data modeling.
Yes, exactly. One of my favorite topics, actually. And you know, it's one that what I believed a few years ago has really evolved in the way similar to the way we model data in CRM, and then also how we model it in Power BI. And I thought it'd be it's a topic that if you're getting into Power BI, especially if you have extreme good experience with database modeling, if you try to do it the way you've always done it, you're not going to get the results that you might want. I thought we'd talk about that for a second. Joel, you and I have worked in CRM for a long time, right?
Right. And data modeling is something that I've associated with when you're building out your CRM, designing your entities. What does data modeling mean, though, from an analytics standpoint, if you're already dealing with existing data sets?
Right. So it's a great question, and one that I think gets left behind sometimes. In fact, I was talking to somebody. I was at the Data Summit earlier this week in Seattle, and I was talking to a friend there. And we were describing some challenges that both of us had run into when we got excited about building our first Power BI reports. That we jumped from I've got data, put a graph and a chart on the dashboard, and I'll just connect all the pieces in between as best I can. But ultimately, I'm trying to get something something to show up. But what we wound up doing was we started with where the data sat in its tables back in the back end, and then just jumped all the way to try to slap that into the front end on the reports, and it worked. But you ultimately built something that was a little fragile when you tried to say, okay, well, what if I want to change that data or change the model, or what if I want to ask a different question than what I originally asked? How do I want to be able to explore that? And that's where data modeling comes in. It's that in-between piece that says, how do I organize the, and I'll use a data modeling term, facts and dimensions, which are just the facts, like, how many records, how many cases do I have? How much total opportunity value is there? How many opportunities have closed this month versus ones that closed last month? Those kind of facts, the dates that these things closed on, and then dimensions saying, what's our trends like? What is the roll up of these numbers? Those kind of dimensions. It's probably not a perfect example, but really taking those pieces and saying, what do I want to know, and what do I want to be able to report against, and how do I organize it so that when I go in and pick and choose out of the menu in Power BI, that I can then drag those onto a form and start consuming the data. One of the things that's, as you move from a CRM data model into Power BI, one of the things you have to figure out is, well, first off, you want to make sure that you have your naming, you're bringing in just the things you're looking for to build, just the things in that area. I've interacted via email with somebody, and their question was right, like, hey, I'm trying to bring the entire data set, the entire CRM into my data model so that I can do any reports on it that I want to do. Let me just import all of CRM into Power BI, and then I'll work out the difference afterwards. That's really
everything in the kitchen sink strategy.
Yeah. And that's just it's a bad strategy. It's a lack of a strategy at all. What happens is you get it all, shove it all in there, and then you're trying to wire it up, and effectively it makes it so that you really still have to be a DBA in order to consume it, because all the tables are, they're individual. You got your opportunity line item table, you got your opportunity table, you got your mini table that joins a couple of records together. Your accounts, your contacts, and your all of that stuff gets pulled into Power BI. It becomes overwhelming, and it's slow. And a user looks at it and goes, "Holy smokes! I've got 300 attributes on the contact record. How am I ever going to figure out what I'm just trying to do? How many opportunities have we won over the last month?" Well,
right.
That whole idea of data modeling is it's kind of you kind of have to start. The traditional approach is to say, give me all the data, let me model it, and then once I have it modeled, then I'm gonna produce some reports off of it. My approach was, give me the data, let me produce some reports, and then maybe I'll figure out a model as I go. I don't think either of those approaches work.
Right.
There are so go ahead.
Question is, how often are the people connecting the data to Power BI and the people actually designing the dashboard the same person? How often are they different? Because I can understand, somebody who's a DBA or something who has indecisive users that, I never know exactly what they're going to want to do, so I'll overcompensate for that and give them everything rather than giving them a defined thing. Is that where that's coming from?
I think you're right. I think the other part of it is if you have your DBA hat on as you go into building a Power BI dashboard, your data so well, how to connect the dots between elements within the data set, between the opportunity status and the opportunity line item and the product. How to connect all those dots. But a normal person, not a DBA, but a normal person doesn't look at it like that. They don't look at the data model, and they're not trying to go after the same goals that you have in DBA modeling, where you're trying to minimize how much data, where you're trying to normalize and move things off into related tables. At the end of the day, Power BI works really, really well if you flatten it out. You flatten that data out, not entirely, but much more than you would if you were building CRM data. If you were modeling it in CRM or in a database itself, or in a traditional data warehouse, what you want to do is in Power BI modeling is you create a row that has, for instance, let's say that we're going to work off the account product record. In CRM we would have, an opportunity product record. In CRM we would have, there's a opportunity record, then you have a opportunity product record, and then you have a related product table, and then you probably also have a related account record that's off there. So it's like 4 tables that are involved at a real simplistic level. in Power BI modeling, because you're really taking it from a different approach, one of the really strong ways to do that is just to say, let me flatten out a record, one row that has the account, it has the salesperson, it has the opportunity name, it has the opportunity date, the opportunity, the product line number, the product category. You sort of flatten it out and say, here's the price that was associated with that particular product on that record, on that opportunity, and you make a real flat row in the database like that. Power BI has a really strong compression engine that makes that that would be a really inefficient way to do it in a straight up database. Really inefficient. But in Power BI, since you're not trying to write to it, you're only trying to really read from it, and it has a really strong compression engine, you can get away with that kind of stuff. What would be a bad design as a database actually works as a really good design in Power BI. I would say my first reaction if I have my DBA hat on is yuck. Separate those out. Denormalize that data. And what I find that in Power BI, what works really well is make a simple, flat table. Don't put everything in it. Just put the necessary pieces in it. Make it big and wide and flat. Let that be your table that people pull from, and people are going to pick and choose out of it. But like you said earlier, one of the challenges has been if you're a DBA and you're having to rebuild these models very, like you're trying to manage really complex models. Every time somebody wants something different, they have to come to you to add that to the model, and you have to figure out how do you reconcile that, and you have to roll it up into views and add it to the very complex. In this case, you can add another column to it and extend it off to the right a little bit, add another attribute, and the person who's going to be consuming it should be able to look at it and go, yep, that's my record. That's what I'm trying to consolidate, as opposed to saying, let me go search all over this data model, finding all these tables to figure out where I pull my data from. It's a different model and a different approach.
Okay, so how far do you take that? If you're reading from CRM and you can get it all in one view to make that nice flat table or something, or you can replicate that in the way that does that. But what about things that go beyond the 2 or 3 levels that CRM views will do? Does that mean in some cases you will use something like our sponsor Kingsway Soft to get data in a SQL query to get it into that flatter format?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I would. It may be that from using a tool like that, SSI Kingsway Soft using the SSIS tool might be a helpful way of getting data formatted into a table that can be consumed with Power BI, or it could be that you just point Power BI to a view that you have of the replicated data. So I don't know exactly, depending on how you want to get the data out of CRM and into SQL, I'll leave that to some, what are the various ways.
So something like the data export service.
That could be
SQL.
used.
Okay.
Yeah, that could be used. Kingsway Soft, how much I've used. I wear that thing out all the time. I use that, but ultimately you're getting it out. But instead of just taking the tables as they exist, like a separate opportunity table from a separate opportunity line item table from a separate account table, you say, let me understand what are the kind of questions and answers the person's going to be asking, and let me pull all those attributes into a single flat table to answer that kind of address space. Now, does that mean that everything is one flat table? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You may have an account record, the account label put in multiple different tables. For instance, you may have like if you have both account opportunity information and you also have case information in the same data model, there could be some redundancy between those two, and that's kind of okay. That's not the end of the world.
Right. Because you could have cases related to opportunities, so it could be all this
Yep.
jumbled many to many to many kind of relationship.
Yeah, and maybe I don't think I said it very very clearly earlier. At the end of the day, this is supposed to be a self-service tool for business users, not a tool for DBAs to understand. So it takes extra effort for a DBA to try to think of it in terms of how does the business user consume this data, and how can I make the table names, the attribute names, the measure names, how do I organize that in a way that somebody who's not a DBA can start consuming that information? That's a challenge. It's harder than it sounds, especially if you're a good DBA. That can make it really hard. If you're not a good DBA, you probably are thinking of it in simpler terms, and that should make it easier in a kind of roundabout way.
So how do you do that? How do you do that and make sure that you're building a simple enough data model for it to be self-service? Do you have some users try it out and see where they get hung up?
Yeah. You know what? Have you ever heard of the rubber ducky programming model? Have you ever heard of that? It's where if you have a problem and you're writing some code and you have a problem, and before you pick up and create, before you go Stack Overflow or before you call a colleague or something, you take the rubber duck, set it on your computer, and you explain the problem to the rubber duck in as simple terms as you can to the rubber duck. And if you can explain it 9 times out of 10, you can actually answer your own question because you've simplified it enough. The same approach on this. If you can explain how, as somebody who doesn't understand the database, doesn't understand all the nuances of the Kimball methodology or anything like that, they don't understand any of that. Can they look at that table and answer questions about what's going on in the business from that? If you have to get crazy and try to explain, well, you need to pull it from here on this time in this case and do this over here, you've overcomplicated. You've put a barrier between the business user and the information that you're presenting to them in Power BI. I can't stress how valuable it is if you can hijack a complete newbie user and say, let me show you something. Can you try this? And let me just look over your shoulder and tell me if it makes sense to you. And listen very carefully to what they're trying to do and what mistakes they make and what they try and where they're successful. If you can get somebody to look at it with fresh eyes, man, that's so valuable. It's just like getting somebody to proofread a document you're doing. If you get somebody else other than yourself to do it, when you can actually spot the errors.
So call your grandpa, and if grandpa understands it, it's probably at the level a typical vice president can understand.
That's right. That's right. But it's an approach and it's a challenge, and again, start with that. Understand the business problem you're trying to solve. You probably, most of the people who are building these probably already understand what the data looks like and the data is coming from. It's really you understand the context that you're working from one end to the other. Now you go to the middle and you spend extra effort making that a nice, clean, user-friendly data model that a user, not a DBA, but the business user can pick and choose and try to answer questions out of.
Okay.
That's a real, if you get that, if you nail that, man, you're golden.
So what do you think real world, put it this way, these tools like Power BI and other tools like Tableau and others like them are designed to be self-service data tools basically that average people can use. How many people out there really use them that way versus using them as the old-fashioned executive dashboard that nobody ever tweaks as an end user?
That's a tough question because I think right now we're still in the ramp up phase where it's your power user and your DBAs that are writing the reports. and they're spending more time building out and tweaking these. Now, there's going to be some people on the far end. The chairman of the board is never going to open up a dashboard and say, let me click and drag this field into a new pie chart. That's just not going to happen normally. But in between that, the bar really has to move higher and higher, or lower and lower, depending on how you want to say it, so that people with less and less comfort level with the source data have the ability and the comfort that they can start answering their own questions using the tool. For instance, one of the challenges I ran into with a data model I built early on was I had these really goofy names. In hindsight, there were goofy names for the things. They were kind of technical names. I had abbreviations in the names, trying to make them really short and sweet. But when you tried to use Cortana to ask the question, Cortana couldn't interpret it because the field names were all abbreviated, and so you couldn't speak in these abbreviated names and Cortana actually recognize them as easily. So moving that bar further and further out so that it's easier and easier for somebody that's less and less technical to consume the data, that's when you get value out of the whole process.
So, Scott, what did you think of the Microsoft Data Insight Summit?
Oh, it was great. We were on site in Seattle this week, and James Phillips got up. He's the VP in charge of a pretty broad area, including a lot of the analytical tools, and including also AX and CRM now. He got up and presented. It was very interesting how much of a play Power BI had in that conversation, where he presented. And it really is because Power BI is the face of a lot of a big toolkit below the surface, like the analytics tools that are available and Cortana Intelligence and machine learning. All those things play in, but Power BI was front and center as the tool that Microsoft has used, that is using, that it's attracting enterprises away from competitors very, very quickly. It was exciting. They pushed out they rolled out some new features, not many new features in terms of things that launched that day. There were a few, but they showed a kind of a 3-month window. And one of the things that was interesting about the way he described it, he said, I'm not going to show you anything that won't ship in the next 3 months. And so you saw quite a bit around the ability to create stories within the data. So as you and I talked about at one point about making the data consumable by people who are executives, you can really take Power BI in future iterations and set it up for storytelling so that you show different slices of the data in different approaches. And as someone walks through the stories, they're reslicing the data, as well as showing drill-through capabilities that let you drill from a record in one page of the report into another report where you're filtered down to just that report. Just that record's data. They showed an example of lists of movies, and then within that there was a list of actors on those movies. And so you could click on the actor's name, it would take you to another report that was a report that was filtered to just that one actor. So it's a fun example, but it was a way of saying, we're making Power BI much more interactive and the data much more discoverable for people who are not DBAs.
Nice.
Good
so
stuff coming down the line.
Did you find out an update on what's new on the desktop?
Yeah, that's one of the new pieces of the desktop. There was one of the pieces that made me excited I was thrilled with, is inside the tables, the new matrix and the new table visualization. You can put data bars within it, so you can see, instead of just a graph of numbers, you can actually have like bar charts within a graph, within this table, showing relative, very much like what you'd see in Excel if you're good at it. So you're seeing that, and it's baked into it. It really lit up one of the dashboards that I had already built. I went back and was able to add it to the dashboard very quickly. So that we see. New connectors, which are not real flashy but certainly useful. That's been in place, and some enhancements to the mobile that made it nicer. But I think the bigger pieces that we see are the ones that are going to be rolling out over the next 3 months, where you're getting easier and easier or better and better tools to be able to describe the data to a non-DBA.
This has been the Power BI and More podcast with Business Solution MVPs Scott Sewell and Joel Lindstrom. This podcast is a production of Dynamic Podcasts, LLC. Follow Scott Sewell on Twitter at Scott Sewell. Subscribe to the CRM Audio Network of podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, or any place else that fine podcasts are available. You can email us at voice@crm.audio. Thanks again to our sponsors Kingsway Soft and Alexa CRM.